love the noughties, and we especially love cars from the noughties, like these, the Ferrari F430 and a Lamborghini Gallardo. This was a time at the very beginning of the motoring technological revolution, a time when driver aids were less restricting, leaving supercars like these as a more analogue experience. For this film, we've got two old rivals back together 20 years later in North Wales to see how they stack up against each other in the modern world.
Now, if you were to ask me what's my favourite era of supercars, I'd probably say the 90s. You've got pop-up headlights and cars like the McLaren F1, Ferrari F355 and Lamborghini Diablo. The problem with the 90s is, although we were trying to be quite innovative, we've not quite got the technology right. A prime example is the shell suit. Nice lightweight sportswear that would go up like a firelighter if you stood anywhere near a naked flame. Now, if you were to ask me what the best era of supercar is, then that's just got to be the noughties. And speaking of which, that's why I've chosen a very naughty supercar from that era, the Lamborghini Gallardo. The Gallardo is the definitive naughty supercar. It's bright yellow, it's impractical, fast, loud, and it's got looks that will make every school kid stop and stare. And on top of that, this is a manual Gallardo. Believe it or not, these things are actually very rare. Just 3% of all Gallardos made were specced with a manual gearbox, the rest of which all came with the ear gear, which nowadays people are arching back to these manual cars because they're just more drivable, and that's why both of the cars that we've got here today are the manual variants. Problem is with modern supercars is they're a little bit too good, and that's why the noughties was the perfect era. We'd started getting technology, we'd started getting reliability. There's lots of Audi parts in this car, which is no bad thing really. It's a time when supercars started to become a little bit more usable. But when the driver was still a very important part, this is, for us, peak supercar. Drivability, a bit of technology, just to help you out if you do get things a bit wrong. But it's nothing that's too invasive. The traction control system on this is very basic, and it's either on or it's off. You have got four-wheel drive, of course, which will help it out if things start to get a little bit messy in a corner. One thing I love about this, unlike the 430, you haven't got different driving modes. You get in, that's it, it's a supercar. You're in supercar mode. Now, a few people might be slightly surprised by my choice of which car to bring to this shoot. And a lot have probably expected me to be in the Ferrari. But around this period, I just don't think they got it right with the looks, and for me, that is an important part of a supercar. I want it to be in your face. I don't care about practicality. But I think one of the things that we're here proving today is that if you wanted power, you'd buy a modern supercar. These things are not about power, and how much power do you need anyway? 500 brake horsepower nearly. That's plenty, especially on a road. I'd rather be entertained than be able to tell my mates I've got more power than them down at the pub. No thanks. I'm going to enjoy my drive instead. Now, as you can see, there isn't a Porsche here today. There is the Ferrari F430. Now, whereas this is my favourite car from this era, there is someone that disagrees with me. He disagreed with me so much so that he was willing to appear on the channel for the first time ever. It's my boss.
So for me, when it comes to supercars, it's not about 0 to 60 times. It's about cars and how they make you feel. It's having a connection with a car. And there's nothing quite like a Ferrari with a manual gearbox. There's only so fast you can drive down a road. I'm not too fussed about the latest and the greatest. I'm a big fan of 90s, early 2000s supercars. So when the opportunity to get behind the wheel of this F430 arose, I couldn't say no. So it's hard to believe that these cars are now 20 years old. When they came out, they were cutting edge technology, and really it was the start of the new chapter, a new breed of supercar for Ferrari and Lamborghini. Both cars in this episode are drivers' cars. They're pure drivers' machines. And I'm lucky enough to be in one that is the last of its kind. It's the last naturally aspirated V8 Ferrari with a manual gearbox. So why am I driving the F430? I've driven several F1 430s. I own a 430 Scuderia, but I've never driven a manual. And it's always been the car that's eluded me. I've always been curious quite how good it is. First initial driving impressions is that it's light on its feet, it's agile, it's analog. I mean, the analog part is definitely helped by the fact it's got that manual gearbox and you're just that bit more involved. Got a bit of tech inside. It's still not intrusive. You don't feel like you're being controlled by it. I mean, Jonty's been ribbing me about the 430 that it sits really high. And yes, compared to the Gallardo it does, but that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing if you're going to use it in the UK and you're going to drive down your favourite B road and not be worrying that you're going to ground out all the time. You may be able to hear that the exhaust on this car is not standard. It doesn't have the valves anymore. So previously on normal 430s, the valves open at 4,000, whereas the valves are always open. It's got a full Capristo exhaust system, and it sings. So at the time, Ferrari were dominating F1. It was full of F1 technology, from this clever E-diff. It's the first time the Manettino switch appeared in a Ferrari. So now I can change my driver modes based on the mood or the type of drive I want to experience or the weather. So trying to compare an F430 with a Gallardo is like trying to do open heart surgery using a pickaxe, when the Ferrari is like a scalpel. It is precise, it is honed, it's very carefully engineered, it's full of technology. The Lamborghini is 3 pedals and a whopping great V10. There's no driving modes. The 430 you could easily do a European tour. You've got a huge boot. We've got a huge fuel tank. You've got the different driver's modes. The Lambo, your boot is the size of a shoebox. And that Gallardo just suits Jonty. He loves being the centre of attention, and a bright yellow Lamborghini. It's perfect. What I love about this car is it's very pure, the design. There's no wings, there's no active aero, there's no screens inside the cabin. The steering is still hydraulic, it hadn't moved to electric at this point, and it's so pure, you just feel the road. This is a brilliant, brilliant road car, and it is massively undervalued and underappreciated. It's one of those under the radar cars. There's only 120 in the UK. I think what I've touched on previously is that supercars these days, in my opinion, is they're just a bit too quick and a bit too good. Whereas this is, you can use all of its power on the road and you're not going silly speeds. It's agile and it's nimble. And it's small, it's so well proportioned. So most of us buy supercars with our hearts. They're not a purchase you sit there and think about with your head. You don't buy them because they make financial sense. You buy them because they pull on your heartstrings. For me, with this being the last naturally aspirated V8 manual Ferrari, it really does hold some significance. When this car was launched, the F1 gearbox was the latest. It was the quickest shift. It was the best an F1 gearbox had been. But Ferrari, being Ferrari, decided to offer a manual option. And really only 10% of the cars chose the manual gearbox. So there's only 120 UK cars. So this is quite a rare thing, but fair play to Ferrari. And there's nothing quite like blipping the throttle yourself.
Adam don't always agree on things, but one thing we do seem to be in tune on is that as supercars have become more modern, they have become less exciting in their quest for perfection. It's cars like these two, the manual Murcielago, the 997 GT3 and Audi R8 that do it for us. And over time, maybe they will become more valuable. These cars bridge the gap between the analogue supercars of the 90s and the technological masterpieces which would soon follow. But here's a question for you. If, back in the day, 50% of people had specced a manual in these cars, would we have seen a manual option on their successors, the 458 and the Huracan? We'd love to know your thoughts on the class of 2004 in the comments below.